I pulled up to grandmother's farm and froze. An ugly industrial dumpster blocked the driveway, and strangers were tossing her precious quilts into the mud like garbage. My uncle turned to me, grinning like a victor, and delivered the sentence that turned my blood to ice. He told me not to make a scene because he was selling the land for $1.6 million right in front of everyone today. My name is Maya Whitaker. I am 34 years old, and in my professional life as an academic advisor at Lakebridge Institute, a quiet private college in Kentucky, I am known for my composure. I deal with panicked students, complex transfer credits, and rigid administrative deadlines with a steady hand and a calm voice. I am the person people come to when they need a messy situation organized into a neat, solvable checklist. But nothing in my decade of managing academic crises could have prepared me for the sight that greeted me when I turned onto the gravel lane of Greystone Acres. I had made this drive hundreds of times. The rhythm of the tires crunching over the crushed stone usually lowered my blood pressure, signaling a shift from the sterile air of my office to the scent of damp earth and curing tobacco that lingered around my grandmother's property. Even after she passed, I came here to breathe. I came here to remember, today. However, the familiar landscape was violently interrupted. A massive, rust-colored industrial dumpster sat squarely in the middle of the driveway, blocking the path to the farmhouse like a barricade. It was an ugly metal scar against the lush green of the front pasture. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden and frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with the caffeine I had consumed on the drive down. I slammed my car into park, not even bothering to kill the engine before I threw the door open. The sound of shattering glass cut through the humid afternoon air. I ran toward the house, my boots slipping slightly on the loose gravel. 3 men I did not recognize were hauling boxes out of the front door. They were not moving with the reverence one offers to the belongings of the recently deceased. They were moving with the brutal efficiency of a demolition crew. As I got closer, I saw one of the men heave a stack of bound volumes into the open maw of the dumpster. My breath hitched in my throat. I knew those spines. They were not just books. They were the farm logs. Every planting season, every harvest yield, every calf born on this land for the last 50 years had been recorded in those pages by my grandfather's hand, and then my grandmother's. "Stop!" I screamed the word, but it came out as a desperate, ragged gasp. "Stop it right now." The men ignored me. One of them, a burly guy in a sweat-stained tank top, walked to the edge of the porch and swung a heavy bundle over the railing. It hit the mud near the dumpster with a wet, sickening thud. The bundle unrolled on impact. It was the wedding ring quilt, the one my grandmother had spent 3 winters stitching, the fabric sourced from the shirts my grandfather had worn when he courted her. I watched as the white lace and blue cotton began to soak up the brown sludge of a recent rainstorm. That was when I saw him. My Uncle Caleb stood on the top step of the porch, surveying the destruction with the detached air of a foreman overseeing a construction site. He was wearing a crisp button-down shirt and dress slacks, entirely inappropriate for farm work, which told me everything I needed to know. He was not here to work. He was here to command. "Caleb," I yelled his name, my voice finally finding its strength. "What are you doing? That is Grandma's quilt. Get them to stop." Caleb looked down at me, shading his eyes against the sun. He did not look guilty. He did not look sad. He looked annoyed, as if I were a telemarketer interrupting his dinner. "Maya," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "You are early. I thought you had a faculty meeting or something today." I ignored his deflection and pointed a trembling finger at the dumpster. "Why are they throwing everything away? We have not even gone through the attic yet. There are heirlooms in there. Caleb, things that matter." He laughed, a short, dry sound that lacked any warmth. "It is just junk. Maya, old paper, moth-eaten blankets, and chipped china. We are doing a favor here. This place is a fire hazard waiting to happen." I rushed to the quilt, grabbing the damp fabric and pulling it toward me. It was heavy with water and mud. I tried to wipe the muck off a patch of blue gingham, but the stain had already set deep into the fibers. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and stinging. This is not junk, I hissed, clutching the ruined fabric to my chest. This is history. It is our family history. Caleb walked down the steps, stopping a few feet away from me. He sighed, the sound of a patient parent dealing with a tantrum-throwing toddler. Look around, Maya. This is a property liquidation. We need to clear the interior to get a proper valuation. I cannot have potential investors tripping over boxes of sentimental trash. Investors? I looked up at him, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. We have not even discussed selling yet. The will has barely been probated. You cannot just decide this. He crossed his arms over his chest. I am the executor. Maya, it is my job to maximize the value of the estate for everyone. That means clearing the debris. It means staging the property. And frankly, it means making hard decisions that you are too emotional to make. I wanted to scream. I wanted to launch myself at him and shake that smug look off his face. But years of conditioning, years of being told that women in our family were the peacemakers, the ones who swallowed their anger to keep the Thanksgiving dinners civil, held me back. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper. Keep the peace. A voice that sounded like my mother whispered in my head. Do not be the difficult one. Is that what this is? I asked, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. Debris? Grandma's life is just debris to you? Liability, Caleb corrected, stepping back up onto the porch. It is an insurance liability. If one of these workers trips on a loose rug or gets cut on a broken picture frame, the estate gets sued. I am protecting us. I am protecting you. He gestured to the door behind him. And do not bother trying your key. I had the locks changed this morning. Security reasons. Since the house is technically vacant, the insurance policy required us to secure the perimeter. The air left my lungs. He had locked me out. This house, where I had learned to walk, where I had spent every summer of my childhood, where I had sat by my grandmother's bedside as she took her final breath. He had turned it into a fortress, and I was on the outside. You changed the locks? I whispered, without telling me. I sent an email. He lied. I knew he was lying because I checked my email every 15 minutes. Maybe it went to your spam folder. He checked his watch, a flashy gold thing that probably cost more than the car I drove. Look, Maya, I have a developer coming to walk the grounds in 2 hours. I need you to clear out. Your car is blocking the flow of traffic for the removal crew. I looked at the dumpster again. One of the men was now tossing photo albums. I saw a flash of a black and white photo, my mother on a pony, before it disappeared into the heap of metal and trash. My impulse was to dive into the dumpster, to claw through the refuse and save every scrap of paper, every single memory he was trying to erase. But I looked at Caleb. He was watching me closely, a smirk playing on his lips. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to cry and beg and dive into the garbage so he could tell the rest of the family how unstable I was. He wanted to paint me as the hysterical niece who could not handle the reality of business. I would not give him that satisfaction. I took a deep breath. Forcing the air down into my diaphragm, I dropped the muddy quilt. It was already ruined. Holding on to it would only dirty my clothes. And right now, I needed to feel clean. I needed to feel sharp. I walked over to a pile of items that had been tossed near the wheel of the dumpster, waiting to be hoisted in. Lying on top of a stack of old magazines was a small, spiral-bound notebook. The cover was faded, but the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Maya's first garden. I remembered that summer. I was 7 years old. Grandmother had given me a small plot of earth behind the kitchen and taught me how to plant marigolds and snap beans. She had helped me track the growth in this notebook. I reached down and picked it up. My thumb brushed over the ink of my name. It was dry. Safe. The men had not destroyed this yet. I looked at Caleb. He was checking his phone, dismissing me entirely. I am taking this, I said, my voice flat and hard. He glanced up, barely registering the item in my hand. Fine, take a souvenir. Just move the car. I walked back to my sedan. My hands were coated in the slick, cold mud from the quilt. I could feel the grit under my fingernails. I opened the car door and placed the notebook gently on the passenger seat. treating it like the holy relic it was. As I started the engine, Caleb called out from the porch. "Hey, Maya." I rolled down the window, staring at him. "Just come to the reunion on Saturday," he shouted over the noise of the dumpster being jostled. "We will have the papers ready. Just sign them so we can get our checks and move on. Do not make this hard on the family." I did not answer. I rolled the window up, sealing myself inside the cabin of my car. I backed out of the driveway, forcing myself not to look at the dumpster again. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The mud on my hands smeared onto the leather cover of the wheel, leaving brown streaks against the black. "Do not make this hard on the family." The phrase echoed in my mind. For my entire life, that had been the mantra. Be good, be quiet, be helpful. Caleb relied on that. He relied on the fact that I was a polite, educated woman who valued harmony over conflict. He thought he had won because he held the new keys and I was driving away. But as I watched the farmhouse disappear in my rearview mirror, I felt something shift inside my chest. The sorrow that had been choking me a moment ago was crystallizing into something colder, something much more durable. I looked at the muddy handprints on the steering wheel. They were not stains of defeat. They were war paint. He wanted me to come to the reunion. He wanted me to sign. I would come to the reunion. All right, but I was done being the niece who kept the peace. Caleb Whitaker had just started a war with the only person who knew exactly where the bodies were buried, and I knew exactly which legal shovel I needed to dig them up. I turned onto the main road and accelerated, leaving the tears behind me at the gate. I was not crying anymore. I was planning. 3 days later, I returned to the farm. I did not drive up the gravel lane this time. I did not announce my arrival with the crunch of tires or the slam of a car door. Instead, I parked my sedan nearly a mile away, tucking it behind a dense thicket of overgrown honeysuckle on an old logging road that bordered the south pasture. I traded my blazer for a dark windbreaker and my heels for boots that I did not mind ruining. If Caleb wanted to treat this property like a secure facility, I would treat it like a target. I moved through the woods that lined the back of the property, navigating by muscle memory. The briars snagged at my jeans, and the humid Kentucky air pressed against my skin, heavy and suffocating. I kept my eyes on the ground, watching for the rusted barbed wire of the old perimeter fence. When I reached the edge of the clearing behind the dilapidated tobacco barn, I paused. The house stood on the rise, silent and imposing. From this angle, it looked normal, but I knew better. Grandmother had shown me the way in when I was 12 years old. We had locked ourselves out one afternoon while picking blackberries, and she had conspired with me, whispering the secret like we were partners in a grand crime. There was an old storm cellar door on the north foundation, hidden behind a trellis of climbing hydrangeas. It led to the root cellar, which connected to the pantry through a narrow, steep staircase that had been boarded up from the inside years ago. But the boards were loose. They had always been loose. I crouched low, sprinting across the open grass until I reached the foundation. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a sharp contrast to the silence of the farm. I pushed aside the thick vines of the hydrangea. The slanted wooden doors were there, rotted at the edges but still functional. I pulled the handle. The wood groaned, a low protest that sounded like a gunshot to my heightened senses. I froze, waiting for a shout, for a dog barking, for Caleb to come storming out. Nothing happened. The only sound was the wind in the oak trees. I slipped into the darkness of the cellar, pulling the doors shut above me. The air down here was cool and smelled of damp earth and potatoes that had gone soft. I clicked on my phone flashlight, the beam cutting through the dust motes. I navigated past empty canning jars and broken furniture to the wooden stairs. Just as I remembered, the latch on the pantry door at the top was flimsy. I slid my credit card between the jamb and the bolt, jiggling it until I heard a soft click. I stepped into the pantry and eased the door closed behind me. The silence inside the house was different from the silence outside. It was sterile, dead. I walked into the kitchen, my boots making no sound on the linoleum, because I moved with deliberate, rolling steps. The room had been stripped. The collection of ceramic roosters that had lined the tops of the cabinets for 30 years was gone. The counters were bare. The magnet-covered refrigerator, usually a chaotic collage of family photos and wedding invitations, was gleaming white and empty. It looked like a house in a catalog, not a home where 3 generations had been raised. I moved to the hallway. The walls were scarred with pale rectangles where pictures had hung. The gallery of ancestors, stern-faced men in sepia and smiling women in technicolor, had been erased. It felt less like cleaning and more like a purge. Caleb was not just selling the house. He was scrubbing away the evidence that we had ever existed here. I headed straight for the study. This had been my grandfather's domain, a room of dark wood and pipe tobacco smoke. Now, it was Caleb's command center. The heavy oak desk was covered in stacks of paper. I took a breath, pulled a pair of latex gloves from my pocket. I had grabbed them from the biology lab at the college, and slipped them on. I could not risk leaving fingerprints. If Caleb realized someone had been here, he would destroy everything before I could use it. I started with the stack on the left, invoices for dumpster rentals, quotes for industrial cleaners, a schedule for an estate sale company called Liquidate Fast. I felt a surge of nausea. He was not even checking the value of things. He was just paying people to haul it away. Then I moved to the center stack. Under a pile of utility bills, I found a large, rolled-up document. I unfurled it on the desk, weighing the corners down with a stapler and a tape dispenser. It was a site plan. The header read, Greystone Market Plaza. I stared at the rendering, where the farmhouse stood. There was a blocky structure labeled Anchor Tenant Retail. The heritage oak tree, the one that predated the Civil War, was replaced by a parking lot with 150 spaces. The creek where I had learned to skip rocks was culverted and paved over for a delivery access road. I looked at the margins of the blueprint. There were handwritten notes in red ink. I recognized Caleb's jagged, aggressive scrawl. One note pointed to the barn. Demo cost high. Burn? Another note next to the timeline. Must clear title by Q2. Maximize liquidity. But it was the date stamp in the bottom right corner that made the room spin. The date was 18 months ago. I leaned back, gripping the edge of the desk. 18 months ago. My grandmother was still driving herself to church. She was still baking pies. She had not even received her diagnosis yet. This was not a reaction to her death. This was not a desperate measure taken by a grieving son, overwhelmed by inheritance taxes. Caleb had been planning to pave over her life while she was still living it. He had drawn up plans to destroy her home while sitting at her Sunday dinner table, eating her roast beef and smiling in her face. The coldness of it settled in my stomach like a stone. This was premeditated. He had been waiting for her to die. I pulled out my phone. I created a new folder in my cloud drive and named it Gray Box. I began to photograph everything. I took close-ups of the dates. I took wide shots of the map. I photographed his handwriting. Every photo uploaded instantly, syncing to a server that Caleb could never touch. I moved to the desk drawers. The top one was locked. I looked around the room. Caleb was arrogant. He would not hide the key well. I checked the top of the door frame. Nothing. I checked under the desk lamp. Nothing. Then I saw a pencil holder, a tacky plastic cup from a golf tournament. I dumped it out. A small silver key fell onto the blotter. I unlocked the drawer. Inside, there was a single thick envelope from a commercial bank. The return address was in Chicago, not local. I opened it. It was a loan rejection letter. Dear Mr. Whitaker, it began, regarding your application for a personal bridge loan in the amount of $400,000. I scanned down the page. The bank had flagged the collateral. He had listed Greystone Acres as the primary asset securing the loan. The date on the letter was 6 months ago. Grandmother was in hospice then. She was dying, and he was trying to mortgage her deathbed to cover his own debts. The bank had rejected it because he did not hold the title yet. He is broke, I whispered to the empty room. That was the driver. That was why everything was happening so fast. It was not about family burden or market timing. Caleb was drowning, and he was using our heritage as a life raft. I photographed every page of the rejection letter. I photographed the envelope. I photographed a second letter threatening legal action for an unpaid luxury car lease. I was just reaching for a folder marked Medical Power of Attorney when a sound froze me in place. The crunch of gravel. A vehicle was coming up the drive. I scrambled. I shoved the letters back into the envelope and placed it in the drawer. I locked it and dropped the key back into the pencil cup, replacing the pens exactly as they had been. I rolled up the blueprints, checking the dust rings on the desk to make sure I placed the stapler and tape dispenser back on their exact circles. The sound of the engine grew louder. It was a heavy diesel engine, Caleb's truck. I peeled off the latex gloves and shoved them into my pocket. I took one last look at the room. It looked undisturbed. I moved fast, slipping out of the study and into the hallway. The headlights swept across the front window, casting long, swinging shadows against the bare walls. I heard the truck door slam. I bolted for the kitchen. I could hear heavy footsteps on the front porch, the jingle of keys. I was in the pantry before the front door opened. I eased the pantry door shut, just as I heard Caleb's voice booming in the entryway. "Yeah, I am at the site now," he was saying, presumably on the phone. "No, the niece is handled. She is soft. She will sign." I held my breath, standing in the dark at the top of the cellar stairs. My heart was hammering so hard, I was terrified he could hear it through the wood. He walked into the kitchen. I could hear the refrigerator door open, the hiss of a soda can being cracked. "I need the cash by Monday," Caleb said, his voice clearer now. "Tell the investors the reunion is just a formality. I run this family." I gripped the railing of the cellar stairs. He was so close. Just a layer of wood and drywall separated me from the man who was selling me out. I waited until his footsteps faded, moving back toward the study. As soon as I heard the study door close, I descended into the cellar. I moved through the darkness with the speed of adrenaline. I pushed the storm doors open, wincing at the scrape of metal. But the noise from inside the house, Caleb now shouting at someone on the phone, masked my escape. I slipped out into the tall grass and sprinted for the tree line. I did not look back until I was deep in the woods, sheltered by the thick trunks of the oaks. I leaned against a tree, gasping for air, my hands shaking. I pulled my phone out and checked the gray box folder. The files were there, the blueprints, the dates, the debts. I had walked in there looking for answers, but I had come out with ammunition. Caleb thought I was soft. He thought I was handled. I looked at the photo of the blueprint on my screen, the red ink calling for the burning of the barn. I put the phone in my pocket and started the long hike back to my car. The sun was setting, casting long, blood-red shadows through the trees. "You are wrong, Uncle Caleb," I thought, my stride lengthening as I moved through the underbrush. "I am not soft. I am just getting started, and by the time you realize what I have done, it will be too late to burn anything." The law office of Graham Hollis was situated above a bakery on Main Street, a location that smelled permanently of yeast and legal dust. There was no glass-walled conference room, no sleek receptionist, and certainly no espresso machine. There was just Graham, a man in his 70s who wore three-piece suits even in the sweltering Kentucky summer and who had drafted my grandmother's will 30 years ago. I sat across from him, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. I had laid out my phone and the tablet where I had organized the gray box folder. Graham adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles and leaned in, scrolling through the images I had captured during my illicit raid on the farmhouse. He looked at the blueprint of the strip mall, the loan rejection letters, and the timeline of destruction. He did not gasp. He did not look shocked. He simply hummed, a low, vibrating sound in his chest, like an old engine idling. "He is desperate," Graham said, finally pushing the tablet back toward me. "I have seen men like Caleb before. They spend money they do not have to impress people they do not like, and eventually, the math catches up with them. He is trying to use the farm to plug a hole in his own sinking ship. He is going to sell it on Saturday," I said, my voice rising slightly. "At the reunion. He has a buyer lined up. He has cut the heat to the barns. He is destroying everything. We have to file an injunction. We have to stop him right now." Graham looked at me over the rim of his glasses. His eyes were a sharp, piercing blue, undimmed by age. "Maya," he said softly, "why do you think he has not been able to get a loan against the property?" "Because probate is not finished," I answered. "Because he does not have the title yet." Graham shook his head slowly. "No, it is because the estate does not own the land." I blinked, confusion clouding my anger. "What do you mean?" "Grandma left everything to the family. Caleb is the executor." Graham opened the top drawer of his filing cabinet. It was a metal beast that screeched when it opened. He pulled out a thick file folder, the edges worn soft with handling. He opened it and extracted a document with a blue cover sheet. He slid it across the desk to me. "Look at the date," he commanded. I picked it up. It was a deed transfer. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, searching for the names. Grantor, Eleanor Whitaker. Grantee, Maya Whitaker. The date was 2 years ago. I felt the air leave the room. She gave it to me?" I whispered, "while she was alive?" Graham nodded. "It was an inter vivos gift, a transfer between living persons. She came to me right after her diagnosis. She told me that she knew Caleb would try to liquidate the moment she was gone. She said, and I quote, 'That boy sees dollar signs where I see roots.' She wanted to make sure the land bypassed the will entirely." I stared at the paper. My name was there. Her signature was there, shaky but determined. "But why did she not tell me?" I asked, my throat tight. "She wanted to protect you from the pressure," Graham explained. "She knew if Caleb found out while she was alive, he would bully you, he would guilt you, he would make her final months a misery of arguments. She instructed me to record the deed, but to hold the physical copy until the moment it was necessary." I looked up at him. "So, I own it. I own Greystone Acres, right now." "You do," Graham confirmed. "You have owned it for 2 years." "Then we can stop him," I said, reaching for my phone. "I can call the police. I can show him this paper and kick him off the property today." Graham reached out and placed a hand over mine, stopping me. "No," he said firmly. "You must not do that." "Why?" I demanded. "He is destroying my house." "Because right now, Caleb is acting as the executor of the residual estate," Graham said, his voice dropping into the cool, detached tone of a strategist. "The contents of the house, the cash accounts, the stocks, those are still in the probate pot. If you reveal this deed today, Caleb will claim fraud. He will claim your grandmother was incompetent when she signed it. He will use the money from the estate, your grandmother's savings, to hire lawyers to fight you. He will drag this out for 5 years, draining every penny of her legacy just to spite you. It creates a war of attrition, and he is fighting with someone else's money." I sank back into the chair. "So what do I do? Let him sell it?" "No," Graham said, a small, wintry smile touching his lips. "You let him try." He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "To remove an executor, we need proof of gross mismanagement or fraud. Right now, his plans are just scribbles on a map. But if he goes to that reunion on Saturday, if he stands in front of witnesses and signs a contract of sale for a property he does not own, if he takes a deposit, if he warrants that he has the title, that is fraud. That is a breach of fiduciary duty. It is criminal." He tapped the desk with his index finger. "We do not just want to stop him, Maya. We want to remove him. We want to ensure he cannot touch a single dime of the remaining money or a single teaspoon of the silver. To do that, we have to let him walk into the trap. We have to let him sign." The weight of his plan settled on me. It was dangerous. It required nerves of steel. I had to watch him parade around my property, acting like the king, and do absolutely nothing until the ink was wet. "Can you do that?" Graham asked. "Can you sit there and let him hang himself?" I thought about the dumpster. I thought about the quilt in the mud. I thought of the red ink on the blueprint. Burn? I picked up the deed and looked at my grandmother's signature one more time. She had played the long game. She had set this up years ago to protect me. I owed it to her to finish the play. I will do it, I said. Good, Graham said. He handed me a folder. I want you to make copies of everything in your gray box. Keep documenting. Every time he cuts a corner, every time he lies, he is just adding nails to his own coffin. I left the law office feeling different. When I had walked in, I was a victim trying to salvage scraps. Now, I was a hunter carrying a loaded weapon in my purse. I decided to drive by the farm one more time, but I kept my distance. I parked on the shoulder of the county road, watching the sunset over the rolling hills. The silhouette of the barn was dark. No lights. He really had cut the power. A battered pickup truck pulled up behind me. I tensed, checking the rearview mirror. But it wasn't Caleb. It was a faded green Ford that I recognized immediately. Hank Mercer. Hank had worked on the farm since before I was born. He was the kind of man who spoke little and fixed everything. He stepped out of his truck, wiping grease-stained hands on a rag. He walked up to my window. I rolled it down. "Hey, Hank." He didn't smile. He looked tired. He leaned his forearms on my doorframe, looking out at the dark fields. "He fired me today," Hank said. "Told me he did not need a handyman for a parking lot." I gripped the steering wheel. "I am so sorry. Hank, you know that is not." "I know," he interrupted. He looked at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He had the same weathered look as the barn would. "I saw you the other night," he said. My heart stopped. "You did?" "Saw you slip into the storm cellar. Saw you come out." I waited for him to ask what I was doing. I waited for him to tell me I was trespassing. Instead, he spat on the gravel. "Good," he said. He reached into his chest pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to me. "That is the log of the heater maintenance," he said, "and the email he sent me telling me to rip the copper wiring out of the east wall to sell for scrap. I did not do it, but he thinks I did." I took the paper. It was evidence. More nails. "Hank," I said, my voice shaking, "why are you helping me?" He looked at me, his expression softening for the first time. "I was there. Maya, 2 years ago, when Graham brought the papers to the kitchen table. He knew. He had known the whole time. Your grandmother called me in to witness the signature," Hank said. "She told me, 'Hank, if anything happens to me, you make sure Maya knows the dirt is hers, but not until she is ready to fight for it.'" He nodded at the house. "She is ready, ain't she?" Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. "Yes, she is ready." Hank tapped the door frame twice. "Then I will see you at the reunion. I will be there, and I will say what needs saying." He walked back to his truck, the gravel crunching under his work boots. I watched him drive away, the taillights fading into the dusk. I looked down at the paper he had given me. I was not alone. I had Graham with the law, I had Hank with the truth, and I had my grandmother's foresight. Caleb thought he was isolating me. He thought he was cutting me off from the herd so he could pick me off, but he was wrong. He was the one standing alone on a foundation of lies. I started my car and turned back toward the main road. I had work to do. I needed to print emails. I needed to organize the timeline. I needed to prepare for a performance. This wasn't just about sentimental value anymore. This wasn't about saving a quilt. This was about justice. Caleb Whitaker was going to sell the farm on Saturday. He was going to stand up and smile and shake hands. And I was going to be there, sitting in the front row, waiting for the moment the trap snapped shut. I touched the passenger seat where the deed lay inside its folder. "See you Saturday. Uncle Caleb," I whispered. "Bring your pen. You are going to need it." The notification arrived on my phone at exactly 10 in the morning on Wednesday, vibrating against the wooden surface of my desk at the college. It was a group email. The subject line read, "Big news for Saturday reunion. Decision for the future." My stomach turned over. I knew that tone. It was the corporate cheerfulness Caleb used when he was trying to sell a lemon of a used car or justify cutting corners on a construction project. I opened the email, my finger hovering over the screen. "Family." The email began, "I know this year has been hard on us all with Mom passing. As executor, I have been carrying the heavy burden of managing the estate's debts and liabilities. It has not been easy, but I have found a solution that will secure a legacy for all of us. I have negotiated a deal that will change our lives. We will finalize it this Saturday at the reunion. Please come ready to celebrate a new chapter. It is what Mom would have wanted. I read it twice. The audacity was breathtaking. What Mom would have wanted. He was invoking the name of the woman whose garden he planned to pave over, using her memory to manipulate her children and grandchildren. Within 15 minutes, the family group chat, which I had muted but not left, exploded. My cousin Sarah, who lived in Ohio and had not visited the farm in 6 years, was the first to reply, "Oh my God, Caleb, is it the sale? How much are we talking?" Then my Aunt Linda, "Thank you for handling this. Caleb, I know Maya has been difficult about the clearing out process, but we appreciate you stepping up." I stared at the screen. Maya has been difficult. So that was the narrative. He had been planting seeds long before this email. To them. I was not the granddaughter who had cared for her during hospice. I was the obstacle. I was the sentimental roadblock standing between them and a payout. I did not type a response. I did not defend myself. Instead, I took a screenshot of the email. I took screenshots of the replies. I saved them all to the gray box folder. Every accusation, every misunderstanding, every lie. It was all going into the file. Then came the second wave of the assault. This one was more subtle. It came from Tessa, Caleb's wife. Tessa was a woman who weaponized sympathy. She called me around noon. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message in the privacy of my car during my lunch break. "Maya, honey," her voice cooed through the speaker, dripping with a sugary concern that made my teeth ache. "I just wanted to check on you. Caleb is so worried you are going to be upset on Saturday. You know he's only doing this because the estate is in such bad shape. The debts are just crushing him. He is trying to save the family from bankruptcy. Really, we just need everyone to be united. Please, for the sake of your cousins, do not make a scene. We all need this." I gripped the phone. The estate is in bad shape. That was the lie. The estate had been solvent. My grandmother lived simply. The only debts were the ones Caleb had likely manufactured, or the ones he was trying to pay off with the farm's equity. And bankruptcy? That was a projection of his own financial state, not the family's. Tessa was painting a picture where Caleb was the martyr and I was the villain. If I argued, I proved them right. If I yelled, I was hysterical. I saved the voicemail to the drive. I realized then that Caleb's strategy was not just financial. It was psychological. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to walk into that reunion screaming accusations so that when he produced his calm, reasonable explanations, the family would side with him. He needed a scapegoat to distract them from the fact that he was robbing them blind. I went back to my office, but I could not focus on student transcripts. My mind kept drifting back to the invoice I had seen on Caleb's desk in the photos I took. Liquidate fast. He had called the furniture junk. He had told me he was clearing debris, but Caleb never threw away something he could sell. I opened my laptop and searched for the company name. Liquidate Fast was a local estate clearing service that specialized in quick turnarounds. Their website boasted about maximizing return on household assets. They had an integrated auction platform where they listed premium finds for quick bidding. I clicked on the Current Auctions tab. The page loaded, displaying rows of antique furniture, china sets, and farm equipment. I filtered by location, selecting the county where Greystone Acres was located. My heart stopped. There, listed as Lot 405, Antique Mahogany Dining Set, was my grandmother's table, the table where we had eaten every Thanksgiving dinner, the table where I had done my homework. I scrolled down, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Lot 412, Vintage Cast, Iron Cookware Collection, her skillets. Lot 418, hand-stitched quilts, various patterns, the ones he hadn't thrown in the dumpster. He was selling them for $20 apiece. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a sharp, hollow ache. He was stripping the house to the bone. He wasn't just selling the land, He was selling the atmosphere, the memories, the physical touchstones of our history. Then I saw it. Lot 450, sterling silver tea service, engraved. I clicked on the image. It was a high-resolution photo. I zoomed in on the handle of the teapot. There, intertwined in delicate script, were the initials E.W. Eleanor Whitaker. This tea set was not just silver. It was the first thing my grandfather had bought her when the farm finally turned a profit in 1970. It was the symbol of their success, of their survival. She kept it polished on the sideboard, using it only for Christmas and when the minister came to visit. The current bid was $300. $300 for a lifetime of pride. I looked at the timer. The auction closed in 4 hours. If I bid on it using my own name, Caleb might see it. The auction company would report the buyer to the seller. He would know I was watching. He would know I was aware of the liquidation. It would tip my hand. I opened a new tab. I created a new email address, buyer758. I registered a new account on the auction site. I linked it to a prepaid credit card I had bought for online purchases, ensuring my name would not appear on the direct invoice sent to the liquidation firm. I went back to the tea set. I did not want to get into a bidding war. I did not want to risk losing it. I clicked the Buy It Now option. The price was $800, a ripoff for scrap silver. Perhaps, but priceless to me. I confirmed the purchase. Congratulations. The screen flashed. You have won Lot 450. I sat back in my chair, staring at the digital confirmation. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a cold, quiet fury. I had bought back my own inheritance. I had paid a stranger for the right to hold my grandmother's teapot. This was the proof I needed to show the family. Not the blueprints, which were abstract, not the loans, which were complicated, but this. This receipt proved that Caleb was not storing items or securing the house. He was pawning our history behind our backs while telling everyone he was saving the estate. I printed the receipt. I printed the listing with the photo of the engraving. I added it to the physical binder I was preparing for Saturday. My phone pinged again. It was a text from Caleb. Hope you are cooling off. Tessa says you are ignoring her. Don't be childish. Maya, come Saturday. Sign the papers, and you will get your cut. It is more money than a teacher makes in 10 years. He was mocking me. He thought he had me cornered. He thought I was sitting in my office crying over a quilt, powerless and petty. He had no idea. I typed out a reply, then deleted it. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to text back and say, "How dare you sell the tea set?" So he could prepare an excuse. He would say it was tarnished, or that the money was for the funeral costs. He would spin it. I would not give him the thread to spin. I put the phone down. Let him think I am sulking. I thought, let him think I am beaten. I looked at the gray box folder on my screen. It was full. I had the deed. I had the timeline. I had the loan rejections. And now, I had the proof of his theft of personal property. Caleb was building a stage for his big reveal on Saturday. He was setting up the lights, checking the microphone, rehearsing his lines about family unity and financial sacrifice. He expected me to be the heckler in the audience, the one everyone booed and ignored. He did not realize that I was not the heckler. I was the one holding the plug to the sound system. I closed my laptop. I had 2 days left. I needed to pick up the tea set from the auction house warehouse without being seen. I needed to review the script Graham had helped me prepare. I walked out of my office and down the hall to the water cooler. I filled my bottle, my movements slow and deliberate. Cold, slow, precise. That was how I was going to play this. I would let Tessa spread her rumors. I would let the cousins whisper that I was selfish. I would let Caleb stand at the head of the table and raise a glass to his own brilliance. And then, when he felt safest, when he felt like the king of the mountain, I would introduce him to gravity. Thursday brought a weather shift that is typical for Kentucky, but always feels like a personal affront from nature. The humidity broke, replaced by a sharp, biting wind that swept down from the north. By 6 in the evening, the temperature had plummeted 20 degrees. By 8, The forecast was calling for a hard freeze. I sat in my living room, watching the local news meteorologist gesture at a map covered in blue frost warnings. My mind instantly went to the livestock. Greystone Acres still held a small herd of about 30 beef cattle, including 6 calves that had been born late in the season. They were hardy animals, but a sudden freeze like this, combined with the damp ground from the previous week's rain, was a recipe for pneumonia. Normally, the automatic heating system in the main barn would kick on when the temperature dipped below 45 degrees, but I remembered the note I had seen on the blueprints, the jagged red ink, cut costs. A sick feeling knotted in my stomach. I pulled up the gray box folder on my laptop and scrolled through the photos I had taken of Caleb's correspondence. I found it. An email to the estate manager, a man Caleb had hired to replace Hank. Subject: Utility audit. Content: Kill the auxiliary power to the outbuildings. We are bleeding cash on electricity. If the animals are cold, they can huddle. Do not burn money we do not have. He had turned off the heat. If I went out there and turned the main power back on, Caleb would get a notification from the utility company. He would know someone was tampering with the account. It would tip him off that I was not the passive, weeping niece he thought I was. It would endanger the entire legal strategy we had built for Saturday. But if I did nothing, those calves could die. I looked at the clock. It was 9 at night. I grabbed my keys. There was a line between legal strategy and moral bankruptcy, and letting animals freeze to death to save a few dollars, or to save a legal case, was a line I refused to cross. I would not become Caleb to defeat Caleb. I did not drive to the farm. I drove to the 24-hour farm supply store 3 towns over, a place where no one would recognize me. I walked into the fluorescent-lit aisles and grabbed a flatbed cart. I loaded it with 3 industrial-grade propane space heaters, the kind used for construction sites. I grabbed 5 heavy wool horse blankets. I grabbed 6 bales of high-calorie alfalfa mix, dense with energy to help the animals generate body heat. At the checkout, the total came to nearly $1,200. I paid with my personal debit card. This was not an estate expense. This was a rescue mission. I drove to the farm, taking the back service road again. The ground was hardening, the mud turning into jagged ruts that shook my sedan violently. I parked behind the equipment shed, far from the main house where the motion sensor floodlights might catch me. The wind was brutal. It cut through my jacket as I hauled the first heater out of the trunk. I could hear the cattle lowing from inside the barn, a low distress sound that confirmed my worst fears. I lugged the equipment across the frozen yard, my breath pluming in the air. When I slid the barn door open just enough to squeeze through, the interior was like an icebox. The air was damp and still, colder than the outside, because the concrete floor held the chill. I clicked on my flashlight. The herd was huddled in the corner, a mass of dark shapes trying to share warmth. The calves were in the center, shivering violently. I set to work. I did not turn on the barn lights. I worked by the beam of my headlamp. I set up the heaters in a triangle formation, far enough away from the straw to prevent a fire, but close enough to create a convection current of warm air. I connected the propane tanks, the hiss of the gas sounding loud in the quiet barn. I struck the igniter. A blue flame roared to life, followed by the orange glow of the heating element. Heat, immediate and merciful, began to radiate outward. I moved to the calves. They were skittish, but I moved slowly, murmuring the same nonsense words my grandmother used to say. Easy now. It is okay. I have got you. I draped the wool blankets over the smallest ones, tucking the corners in so they would not slip. They stopped shivering almost immediately, their large eyes reflecting the orange glow of the heaters. I was breaking open a bale of alfalfa when the barn door slid open a few more feet. I froze, my hand diving into my pocket for my pepper spray. If it was Caleb, I was done. The plan was blown. A silhouette stepped into the dim orange light. It was bulky, wearing a heavy Carhartt jacket and a cap pulled low. You are gonna need more insulation on that north wall if you want that heat to stay in. A voice rumbled. It was Hank. I let out a breath that was half a sob. "Hank, you scared me to death." He did not apologize. He just walked in, carrying a roll of reflective insulation under one arm and a staple gun in the other. He walked past me to the drafty north wall of the barn, where the wind was whistling through the gaps in the aged wood. He stepped back, measuring the height with his eyes, and began to unroll the silver insulation. "How did you know?" I asked, watching him work. "Saw the weather report," Hank grunted, driving a staple into the wood with a sharp thwack. "Knew that city boy would not think to check the thermostat. Knew you would." He did not ask why I had not just flipped the breaker. He knew. He understood the game we were playing without me having to explain a single rule. I went back to the alfalfa, spreading it in the troughs. For the next hour, we worked in silence. The only sounds were the roar of the heaters, the crunch of hay, and the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of Hank's staple gun sealing the drafts. When we were done, the barn was transformed. It was not hot, but it was warm, a steady, survivable 50 degrees. The calves were bedded down in the fresh straw, chewing contentedly. The herd had relaxed. I sat down on a hay bale, wiping sweat and dirt from my forehead. Hank sat opposite me on an overturned bucket. The orange light cast deep shadows on his weathered face. "You are a good stockman." "Maya," he said quietly. "Your grandmother knew that." I looked at my hands. They were raw from the cold and the twine of the bales. "She would be furious at what he is doing." I said, "Selling the land is one thing, but this, letting living things suffer to save a nickel? It is evil." Hank nodded slowly. He pulled a thermos from his jacket, unscrewed the cup, and poured some coffee. He handed it to me. "She told me about the deed." Hank said suddenly. I froze, the cup halfway to my lips. "You knew? Before Graham told me?" Hank took the thermos back and took a swig from the bottle. "I drove her to the notary. 2 years back. She could barely walk that day. Her hip was giving her hell. But she made me help her into the truck. Said we had an errand that could not wait." He looked at the heaters, watching the blue flames dance. "We sat in that notary office for an hour. After she signed it over to you, she made me swear on my mother's Bible. She said, 'Hank, Caleb is going to come for this place like a locust when I'm gone. He is going to try to strip it bare. Maya is going to be too sad to fight him at first. She has got a soft heart.' I felt a lump form in my throat. She said, 'You let her grieve. You let him show his true colors. And when Maya finds her backbone, you tell her I never left her empty-handed. I gave her the sword. She just has to be the one to swing it.'" I stared at him, tears blurring the orange light. She knew. She had orchestrated this entire defense from beyond the grave, predicting every move Caleb would make and every moment of weakness I would have. She hadn't just left me a farm. She had left me a lesson in survival. I felt a shift inside me. Up until this moment, I had been driven by anger and a sense of violation. But now, it was something deeper. It was a duty. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was the closing argument in a case she had started building 2 years ago. I stood up. "I am ready. Hank, I am not soft anymore." Hank stood too. He looked at the barn, warm and safe. "I know. Now go home. Get your paperwork in order. I will keep an eye on the heaters until morning." I wanted to hug him, but I knew he would hate that. Instead, I nodded. "Thank you." I left the barn and walked back to my car in the freezing wind, but I did not feel the cold anymore. I felt forged. When I got home, I did not go to sleep. I went to my study. I took the gray box folder and I began to professionalize it. I printed every photo. I printed the email about cutting the heat. I printed the receipt for the heaters and the hay, highlighting the timestamp to prove I had stepped in when the executor had failed. I organized the documents into a binder with tab dividers. Tab 1, Proof of Ownership. Tab 2, Evidence of Premeditated Liquidation. Tab 3, Financial Insolvency of the Executor. Tab 4, Negligence and Animal Cruelty. I punched holes in the pages with a rhythmic, satisfying crunch. This was no longer just a collection of secrets. It was a legal indictment. It was a weapon of mass destruction for Caleb's reputation. I scanned the receipt for the tea set I had bought back. Tab 5. Theft of estate assets. I backed up the digital files to 3 different cloud servers and a physical hard drive that I locked in my fireproof safe. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was late, past midnight. I looked at the screen. A text from Caleb. "You are awfully quiet. Usually, you would be sending me paragraphs about how much you miss the place. Finally realized who is in charge? See you Saturday. Don't be late." I stared at the message. He was goading me. He was poking the bear, trying to get a rise out of me so he could show the text to the family and say, "See? She is unstable." I didn't type a response. I didn't block him. I took a screenshot of the text. I printed it, I punched holes in it, and I filed it under tab 6, Harassment and Coercion. I closed the binder. The snap of the rings sounded like the cocking of a gun. "I am not quiet. Uncle Caleb," I said to the empty room, "I am just saving my breath for the verdict." The Friday morning before the reunion, I sat in the cramped conference room of Graham Hollis's office. The air conditioner rattled in the window, fighting a losing battle against the humidity, but the atmosphere at the table was cold and clinical. We were not discussing family dynamics anymore. We were discussing the mechanics of an ambush. Graham placed a single sheet of paper in front of me. It was a blank template for a document called a Family Settlement Agreement and Waiver of Liability. "He is going to try to get you to sign something like this," Graham said, tapping the paper with his pen. "He will not call it a waiver. He will call it a consensus sheet or a sign-in for the disbursement. He will bury the language in the fine print. But if you sign it, you are essentially agreeing that his accounting is correct and waiving your right to sue him later." I looked at the document. It was a legal bear trap. "So I just refused to sign?" I asked. Graham shook his head. "No. You let him present it. You let him explain it. You need him to state, on the record, that this document represents the final and total distribution of the estate assets. We need him to commit to the lie." Graham stood up and walked to the whiteboard, where he had drawn a timeline. "Here is the sequence of fire. Maya, listen carefully. If you reveal the deed too early," he spins it as a misunderstanding. He says, "Oh, I didn't know. Let's work it out." He plays the victim. You have to wait until he has crossed the line of no return. "What is the line?" I asked. "The moment he accepts money," Graham said, "or the moment he attempts to bind the estate to a sale contract. That is fraud. That is conversion of assets." He handed me a thick manila envelope. Inside were 3 certified copies of the deed transfer. "But this is your shield," Graham continued, pulling out a second document. "This is the affidavit of capacity." I read the title. It was a sworn statement from my grandmother's primary care physician and her neurologist, dated the same week she signed the farm over to me 2 years ago. "Caleb's only defense will be to claim Eleanor was senile," Graham explained. "He will say she did not know what she was signing. This document proves that she scored 30 out of 30 on her cognitive assessment 3 days before she gifted you the land. It certifies she was of sound mind, acting of her own free will, without duress." I ran my thumb over the doctor's signature. She had thought of everything. She had known Caleb would try to gaslight the family into thinking she was crazy, so she had gotten a doctor to certify her sanity in advance. I placed the affidavit in my binder under tab 1. "Now let us talk about the barn," Graham said. "You have the receipts for the heaters?" I nodded. Tab 4. "I also have the email where he ordered the heat cut." "Good," Graham said. "In legal terms, that is called waste. It is a breach of fiduciary duty. An executor is required by law to preserve the value of the assets. By cutting the heat and risking the livestock to save a few pennies, he is actively damaging the estate. It proves he is acting in his own interest, liquidity, rather than the estate's interest, value. It destroys his 'I am doing this for the family' defense." I spent the next 2 hours with Graham, rehearsing the confrontation. It was not like practicing a speech. It was like learning choreography for a sword fight. If he says X, Graham would say, "You ask why. Do not make statements. Ask questions. Force him to lie. Question. Uncle Caleb, have you verified the title at the county clerk's office? Question. Uncle Caleb, are there any other claims on this land? Question. Uncle Caleb, are you acting as the executor or the owner? I practiced my tone. It had to be flat, monotone. If I cried, I lost. If I screamed, I lost. I had to sound like an IRS auditor who had found a discrepancy in row 12. I had to be the personification of the bureaucracy he was trying to bypass. By the time I left Graham's office, it was mid-afternoon. I had one more stop to make before I retreated to my apartment to wait for Saturday. I went to the public library to use their terminal. I wanted to access a public records database that I didn't want linked to my home IP address, just in case Caleb was tech-savvy enough to track traffic, though I doubted it. I had been bothered by the date on the loan rejection letter I had found. Why was everything happening this weekend? Why was the developer visit scheduled for Saturday? I searched Caleb's name in the state's civil court records. Nothing new came up. Then I searched for judgment liens. And there it was. It was not a bank loan. It was a confession of judgment attached to a private hard money lending firm based in Lexington. A confession of judgment is a nasty piece of legal work. It essentially bypasses the court trial if you miss a payment. The lender can just seize your assets. The amount was $400,000. The maturity date was the upcoming Monday. I sat back in the library chair, the hum of the overhead lights buzzing in my ears. He did not just want to sell the farm this weekend, he had to. If he did not have a deposit check in his hand by Monday morning to show that lender, they were going to freeze his personal accounts. They were going to take his house, his car, and his reputation. That explained the rush. That explained the developer coming on a Saturday. That explained why he was willing to let the calves freeze to save on the electric bill. He was terrified. He was $400,000 in the hole and 72 hours away from total ruin. I printed the lien record. Tab 3. Financial insolvency. This changed everything. It meant he would be desperate. A desperate man is dangerous, but he is also sloppy. He would try to bulldoze through any objection because he literally could not afford to stop. I drove home with the binder on the passenger seat. It felt heavy, like a brick. When I got to my apartment, the isolation hit me. My phone had been silent all day, which was worse than the angry texts. I checked social media. My cousin Sarah had posted a photo of herself and Aunt Linda at a nail salon. The caption read, "Getting ready for the big reunion. So grateful for family who steps up to handle the hard stuff. Chapter blessed." The comments were full of heart emojis from the rest of the family. Even my second cousins, people I had babysit, were liking it. They had created a bubble where Caleb was the hero and I was the ghost. They were celebrating the sale of the land before the ink was even dry, spending the money in their heads. I felt a pang of loneliness so sharp it almost bent me over. I wanted to call them. I wanted to scream. He is lying to you. He is broke. He is stealing from us. But I couldn't. Graham's warning was clear. If you warn them, they will tell Caleb. Caleb will panic. He might forge a document, or he might find a way to delay the reunion. And then we lose our chance to catch him in the act. I had to let them walk into the room believing the lie. I had to let them look at me with pity and annoyance. I had to be the villain of their story for 24 more hours so I could save them from the real villain. I spent the evening securing the evidence. I treated it like a military operation. I put the original deed and the affidavit in a safety deposit box at my bank, which I would pick up on Saturday morning on my way to the farm. I kept a certified copy in the binder. I scanned everything to a USB drive, which I put on my keychain. I emailed the entire gray box folder to Graham, to my work email, and to a burner email address I had created. There was no way he could destroy this. If he burned the binder, I had the cloud. If he smashed my phone, I had the lawyer. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror. I looked at my reflection. My eyes looked tired, dark circles forming underneath them. I straightened my spine. Question. Uncle Caleb, who authorized the sale? My voice wavered. I tried again. Question. Uncle Caleb, who authorized the sale? Better, colder. Question. Uncle Caleb, is this your signature? I stared at myself until the face in the mirror didn't look like Maya the niece anymore. It looked like Maya the executor of justice. I went to my closet and picked out my clothes for tomorrow. I did not choose a floral dress or casual jeans, which was the standard attire for our summer reunions. I chose a dark navy blazer, tailored trousers, and a white blouse buttoned to the collar. I chose boots that were polished to a shine. I was dressing for a funeral. I packed the bag I would take, the binder, the tablet, a bottle of water, and the small spiral notebook I had rescued from the dumpster, Maya's first garden. I tucked that into the inside pocket of my blazer, right over my heart, a reminder of what I was fighting for. The sun went down, and the city lights of Lexington flickered on outside my window. I tried to sleep, but my mind was racing. I kept seeing the blueprint with the red ink. I kept seeing the calves huddled under the heaters. I thought about Hank Mercer, sitting out there in his truck, watching the barn, my only ally on the inside. Tomorrow, the rumors would stop. Tomorrow, the gaslighting would end. I closed my eyes and visualized the moment. The clipboard, the pen, the silence. Click. I finally drifted off to sleep, dreaming of gavels and locking gates. The trap was set. The bait was laid. All Caleb had to do was step on the X. Saturday arrived with a sky that was painfully blue, the kind of deceptive brightness that masks a biting chill. I pulled my car onto the grass verge at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. The invitation, or rather, the summons, had stated that the proceedings would begin at 1 o'clock. My lateness was calculated. I did not want to mingle. I did not want to make small talk about the weather or pretend to be interested in my cousin's new kitchen renovations while they mentally spent their inheritance. I wanted to arrive when the stage was already set, when the tension was highest. Greystone Acres did not look like a farm anymore. It looked like the venue for a corporate merger. A massive white event tent had been erected in the front yard. Crushing the winter rye grass my grandmother had carefully overseeded last autumn, there were no checkered tablecloths, no mismatched lawn chairs, no smell of slow-cooked brisket or potato salad. Instead, high-top cocktail tables were scattered around, draped in black linen. A catering van was parked where the tractor usually sat, and servers in black vests were circulating with trays of hors d'oeuvres that looked ridiculous against the backdrop of the grain silo, shrimp cocktail and bruschetta. It was performative opulence, designed to make everyone feel rich before they had seen a dime. I grabbed my dark leather briefcase from the passenger seat. It was heavy with the weight of the binder, the gray box evidence, and the deed. I smoothed the lapels of my navy blazer, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time to ensure my expression was locked down, and stepped out of the car. The wind whipped at my hair, but I did not button my coat. I wanted them to see the blazer. I wanted them to see the professional armor I was wearing. As I walked toward the tent, the chatter died down. It happened in waves, starting from the perimeter and rolling toward the center. Heads turned. I saw my Aunt Linda pause with a wine glass halfway to her mouth. I saw my cousin Sarah nudge her husband and point. They had all read the group chats. They all knew I was the difficult one, the unstable niece who couldn't let go. I walked straight into the tent. The air inside was warmer, heated by portable blowers that hummed in the corners. Caleb had spared no expense for the comfort of the guests, even while he had tried to freeze the cattle. Caleb stood at the front of the tent near a large projection screen. He was wearing a charcoal suit that was tailored a little too tightly, his hair gelled back. He looked like a televangelist about to ask for donations. Beside him, Tessa was working the room like a politician's wife. She wore a cream-colored dress and a fixed smile, touching arms, laughing too loudly at jokes, and whispering assurances. "Maya!" Tessa called out, her voice pitching up an octave. "We were so worried you were not coming." She moved to intercept me, likely to guide me to a seat in the back, out of the way. I did not stop walking. I gave her a curt nod, bypassing her outstretched hand. "Hello?" "Tessa," I said, my voice flat. I walked to the front of the room. There was a semicircle of folding chairs arranged around the screen. In the center, conspicuously empty, was my grandmother's favorite wingback chair. Caleb must have had it hauled out of the living room to serve as a prop, a symbolic throne to preside over the dismantling of her legacy. I walked past the empty folding chairs. I walked right up to the wingback chair. I sat down. A murmur ran through the crowd. That chair was sacred ground. By sitting in it, I was not just taking a seat. I was claiming a position. I placed my briefcase on the floor beside me, the metallic click of the latch sounding loud in the sudden silence. I crossed my legs and looked up at Caleb. He stared at me, his jaw tightening. For a second, his composure slipped, and I saw the flash of genuine hatred in his eyes. But he recovered quickly, putting his mask back on. "Glad you could join us, Maya," Caleb said, speaking into a wireless microphone. "We were just getting started." He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms wide. "Family, thank you for being here. I know the last few months have been hard. Losing Mom, Grandma Eleanor, was a blow to us all. But as the executor, I have had to put my grief aside to deal with the reality of the situation." He clicked a remote. The screen behind him lit up. The first slide was a collage of photos, but they were not the warm, golden hour photos of the farm we all loved. They were photos of rot, a close-up of a water stain on the ceiling, a picture of the old tractor rusted in the weeds, a shot of the barn roof with a few missing shingles. He had cherry-picked the decay. He had zoomed in on the cracks to make the whole foundation look crumbling. "The farm is failing," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a somber register. "The structural reports are a nightmare. The roof needs $40,000 in repairs. The plumbing is shot. The insurance premiums are skyrocketing. To keep this place running would bankrupt the estate within a year. I could not let that happen to your inheritance." He clicked the remote again. A spreadsheet appeared. The numbers were blurry, but the bottom line was in bold red font. Estimated maintenance cost, $200,000 per year. He was lying. I knew the accounts. The farm broke even, sometimes made a small profit. The maintenance he was projecting likely included a salary for himself. "I have spent sleepless nights trying to find a way out," Caleb continued, pacing the stage. "I have negotiated with creditors. I have fought with the county. And finally, I found a partner who understands the value of this location." He clicked the remote one more time. The screen changed. The dreary photos of rot vanished, replaced by a sleek, vibrant architectural rendering. Greystone Market Plaza. It was a generic strip mall, a large grocery store anchor, a row of fast casual dining spots, and a massive, paved parking lot. The rendering showed happy, faceless people walking where the vegetable garden used to be. The room gasped, but it was not a gasp of horror, it was a gasp of awe. To them, this looked like progress. It looked like money. "I have secured a deal with a developer who is ready to move immediately," Caleb announced, his voice booming. "He is not just buying the land, he is buying the potential." He paused for effect, letting the silence stretch. "I am selling your grandmother's farm for $1.6 million today." The number hung in the air. 1.6 million. I saw the reaction instantly. My cousin Sarah covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Aunt Linda grabbed her husband's hand. You could practically hear them doing the division in their heads. 30 people in the room, even after taxes and fees. That was a life-changing amount of money for most of them. Caleb smiled. He had them. He had dangled the carrot, and they were drooling. "The developer is here with us," Caleb said, gesturing to a man in a navy suit standing near the catering table. "He has the contracts ready, but because the title transfer is complex, and to ensure everyone gets their share as quickly as possible, I am talking within 60 days. I need a consensus." He picked up a clipboard from the table beside him. "This is just a formality," he said, waving it casually. "It is a standard family agreement. It says you authorize me to finalize the sale today, to accept the deposit, and to distribute the funds. It shows the developer we are a united front, no disputes, no legal holdups, just cash in your pockets." He handed the clipboard to Aunt Linda, who was sitting in the front row. She did not even read it. She signed it with a flourish, beaming at Caleb. She passed it to her son. He signed it. I watched the clipboard move down the line. It was gathering momentum. Every signature was a brick in the wall Caleb was building to block me out. He was creating a narrative of total family consent. If I objected after everyone else had signed, I wasn't just fighting Caleb. I was fighting everyone in that tent. I was the one taking money out of their pockets. Caleb watched the clipboard move. He wasn't looking at the people signing. He was looking at me. He knew. He knew that I was the only loose end. He needed my name on that paper. Without me, the united front was a lie. Without me, there was a risk of a challenge. The clipboard reached my cousin David, sitting directly to my right. He signed it and turned to me. "Here you go." "Maya," he said, offering me the clipboard and the heavy black pen. "Do not overthink it. It is a lot of money." The room went quiet. They were all watching. The catering staff stopped moving. The hum of the heaters seemed to get louder. Caleb took a step forward. "Just sign it, Maya," he said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "Do it for the family. Do it so we can all move on. Mom would not want you to hold everyone back." I looked at the clipboard. The document was exactly what Graham had predicted. Consensus and waiver of liability. I looked at the list of signatures. 20 names. 20 people who had just signed away their rights because they were blinded by a number on a screen. I took the clipboard. I took the pen. I looked up at Caleb. He was practically vibrating with anticipation. He needed this. He needed it by Monday. If I signed, he could take this document and the sale contract to his lender and say, "See, it is done. The money is coming." He could save his own skin. I felt the weight of the pen in my hand. It would be so easy to sign, to just let it go, to take my share of the $1.6 million and walk away, to not be the villain. But then I felt the notebook in my inside pocket. Maya's first garden. I remembered the calves shivering in the barn. I remembered the tea set on the auction block. I uncapped the pen. The sound was a sharp click that echoed in the quiet tent. Caleb smiled. He thought he had won. I lowered the pen to the paper, but I did not sign my name. Instead, I drew a slow, deliberate line through the signature block. Then I flipped the page and drew a line through the entire text of the agreement. The sound of the pen scratching through the paper was violent and loud. I recapped the pen. Click. I looked up. Caleb's smile had vanished. His face was a mask of shock that was quickly curdling into rage. "I am not signing. Caleb," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the silence of the tent, it carried to every corner. Caleb laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "Okay, Maya is having a moment. Look, Maya, we can talk about your share privately if you think the math is wrong." "It is not about the math," I interrupted. Standing up, I picked up my briefcase. I turned to the room. I looked at my aunts, my cousins, the people I had grown up with. "I am not signing because Caleb does not have the authority to sell this farm," I said clearly, "and neither do any of you." Caleb stepped off the riser, his face turning red. "Sit down. Maya, you are embarrassing yourself. You are ruining this for everyone." I ignored him. I placed my briefcase on the cocktail table in front of me. I unlatched it. "I am not ruining anything," I said, pulling out the first binder. "I am stopping a fraud." The developer in the back straightened up. The word fraud has a way of cutting through a party atmosphere very quickly. Caleb marched toward me. "Get her out of here." He snapped to one of the caterers, as if they were his personal security. "She is trespassing." I unzipped the binder and pulled out the deed. I held it up. "I am not trespassing. Caleb," I said, my voice steady, locking eyes with him. "I am the owner." The room exploded into noise. But I did not look at them. I kept my eyes on Caleb. I saw the color drain from his face. I saw the panic set in. The trap was sprung. He had made his speech. He had stated the price. He had claimed authority. And now, he was standing in the middle of a lie that was about to collapse on top of him. The silence in the tent was absolute. The only sound was the wind flapping the canvas walls against the metal poles, a rhythmic, hollow thudding that sounded like a heartbeat. Caleb stood frozen, his hand half extended toward the security guard he had tried to summon. His face was a rictus of confusion and condescension, the expression of a man who had heard the words I spoke but could not process their meaning. "You own it?" Caleb repeated, a chuckle bubbling up in his throat. He turned to the crowd, seeking an audience for his mockery. "Did you hear that? Maya thinks she owns the farm." He looked back at me, shaking his head with exaggerated pity. "Maya, honey, I know you are grieving. I know you spent a lot of time here, but possession of a key does not mean possession of the land. I am the executor. The will is clear. The assets are in the trust." I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up to shout him down. I simply stayed seated in the wingback chair, my hands folded on top of the black binder I had placed on the cocktail table. "I have a question for you, Uncle Caleb," I said. My tone was conversational, polite even. It was the tone I used when a student came to my office claiming they had turned in an assignment that I knew did not exist. He rolled his eyes. "We do not have time for questions. The developer is waiting." "It is a simple question," I pressed, locking eyes with him. "When did you last physically go to the county recorder's office to pull the deed for this property?" Caleb scoffed. "I do not need to go to the recorder's office. I have the original deed in my safe. It has been there since Dad died in 1998. I nodded slowly. "That is what I thought. You are working off a 20-year-old document." I opened the binder. The metal ring snapped open with a sharp, mechanical sound. I pulled out the first document. It was encased in a clear plastic sheet protector. I slid it across the smooth black tablecloth. It stopped exactly at the edge, right in front of where the developer was standing. "That," I said, pointing to the paper, "is the current deed." The developer, not Caleb, was the one who reached for it. He was a businessman. He knew that in real estate, paper beats rhetoric every time. He picked up the sheet, adjusting his glasses. Caleb snatched it from his hands. "What is this?" Caleb demanded, scanning the page. His eyes darted back and forth. I saw the moment the words hit him. "Grantor, Eleanor Whitaker, grantee. Maya Whitaker, date of recording, October 14th, 2 years ago." "This is fake," Caleb spat, throwing the paper back onto the table. It slid toward Aunt Linda. She looked down at it, her brow furrowed. "It is a forgery," Caleb announced, his voice rising. "She typed this up on her computer. You can print anything these days. It is a desperate attempt to stall the sale." I reached into the binder again. "If it is a forgery," I said calmly, "then the clerk of court is in on it." I pulled out the certification page. This is the notary log, certified by the state board. It shows grandmother's signature, my signature, and the notary's stamp. The book and page number match the official county record. You can check it on your phone right now. The website is public. Caleb's face turned a mottled purple. He grabbed the deed again, crumpling the edge. "Mom would never do this," he yelled. "She told me I was the executor. She trusted me to handle the estate. She would not go behind my back and give the most valuable asset to you." "To me?" I asked. "Or to the only person she knew would not sell it for parts?" Caleb looked at the developer. The man in the suit was no longer smiling. He was looking at his phone, tapping furiously. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was searching the county parcel database. "This is a trick," Caleb insisted, looking around the room at the family. "She has manipulated the documents, or she manipulated Mom. That is it." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You took advantage of her. You were down here every weekend when she was sick. You got her when she was confused. You got her when she was on those pain meds. This is undue influence." A ripple of agreement went through the tent. I saw my cousin Sarah nodding. This was a narrative they could understand. The evil niece preying on the sick grandmother. It was easier to believe that than to believe they had been cut out of the will legitimately. I waited for the murmurs to peak. Then I reached into the binder for the third time. "I anticipated you would say that," I said. I pulled out a document with a blue medical seal at the top. Undue influence requires a lack of capacity, I recited. Using the legal definition Graham had drilled into me, it requires a victim who does not understand the consequences of their actions. I held up the paper. This is an affidavit of capacity. It was signed by grandmother's neurologist and her primary care physician. I read from the document, my voice clear and projecting to the back of the tent. Patient Eleanor Whitaker demonstrates full cognitive orientation to time, place, and situation. She articulates clearly her desire to transfer real property to her granddaughter. Maya Whitaker. She explicitly states her reasoning is to preserve the family legacy against potential liquidation. Patient scores 30 out of 30 on the mini mental state examination. I dropped the paper onto the table next to the deed. The date of the exam is October 11th, 2 years ago. I said, 3 days before she signed the deed. She was not confused. Caleb, she was smarter than you gave her credit for. The room went silent again. The senile old lady defense had just evaporated. Aunt Linda picked up the medical affidavit. She adjusted her reading glasses. She looked at the signature of the doctor. "That is Dr. Evans," Linda whispered. "He has been the family doctor for 40 years. He wouldn't lie." The energy in the tent shifted. It was a physical sensation, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. The cousins who had been glaring at me were now looking at Caleb. They were doing the math. If the deed was real, there was no $1.6 million. There was no payout. Caleb sensed the shift. He looked like a cornered animal. He turned to Tessa. Tessa stepped forward. She put a hand on my shoulder, her touch light but possessive. "Maya, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with that cloying, toxic sympathy. "Put the papers away. We know you loved her. We know you are attached to the house. But look at what you're doing. You are tearing the family apart. Even if she signed this paper, she was a lonely old woman. She probably just wanted to make you feel special. She didn't mean for you to actually keep it from the rest of us. She didn't mean for you to steal your cousin's inheritance." She looked out at the crowd, her eyes wide and pleading. "Family is about sharing. Maya, it is about love, not about legal loopholes. Don't be cold. Be the bigger person. Tear up the paper, and let's handle this like a family." It was a brilliant move. She was trying to bypass the law by appealing to guilt. She was trying to make me feel small, selfish, and cruel. I looked at Tessa's hand on my shoulder. I reached up and removed it, dropping her hand as if it were a dead insect. I stood up, smoothing my blazer. I looked at Tessa, then at Caleb, and finally at the room full of people who had been ready to sell my childhood home for a check. "We are not talking about feelings. Tessa," I said, my voice cutting through her emotional fog. "We are not talking about what you think she meant or what you feel you deserve." I picked up the deed and held it up like a shield. "We are talking about property law. We are talking about a legal transfer of title recorded by the Commonwealth of Kentucky." I turned to Caleb. "You stand there and talk about family while you try to sell a property you do not own to pay off debts you created. You talk about legacy while you have a dumpster full of her history parked in the driveway." I took a step toward him. "So let's be clear. I am not the one stealing an inheritance. I am the one protecting the asset from a man who committed fraud the moment he signed a listing agreement for this land." Caleb flinched. The word fraud hit him harder than the papers had. The developer cleared his throat. It was a dry, uncomfortable sound. "I need to see that deed," the developer said. Caleb tried to block him. "Jim, wait. She is just—" The developer pushed past Caleb. He took the paper from my hand. He looked at the stamp. He looked at the book and page number. He pulled out his phone and typed in the reference number. He waited for a moment, the loading circle on his screen spinning. Then he looked up. He looked at me. Then he looked at Caleb with a gaze that could peel paint. "It is recorded," the developer said. "The owner of record is Maya Whitaker." He dropped the paper back onto the table. He turned to Caleb. "You told me you had clear title. You told me the title search was done." I have the will," Caleb stammered. sweat beading on his forehead. "The will says I am the executor. The will supersedes the deed." "No, it does not," I said, delivering the final blow of this round. "A will only controls assets the deceased owned at the time of death. She did not own this farm when she died. Caleb, I did. It was never in the estate. It was never yours to sell." The crowd erupted. Aunt Linda stood up. "Caleb, is this true? Did you know this?" My cousin David threw his pen down. "So there is no money? We signed that waiver for nothing?" Caleb was backing away, shaking his head. "No, listen to me. She tricked her. We can sue. We can contest it." I watched him unravel. He was not the confident businessman in the charcoal suit anymore. He was a liar caught in the headlights of the truth. But I was not done. I had established ownership, but I had not yet exposed the motive. I had not yet shown them why he was so desperate to sell today. I reached for the binder again. "You can try to sue." "Caleb," I said, "but before you call a lawyer, you might want to explain to the family why you are in such a rush to close this deal by Monday morning." I pulled out tab 3, the financial records. "I think the family deserves to know about the $400,000 judgment lien that is about to hit your personal accounts," I said. Caleb's eyes went wide. He looked at the paper in my hand, and for the first time, I saw genuine terror. I placed the gray box on the table. It sat there, a black brick of evidence, radiating heat. I am not speaking with emotion. "Tessa," I said, not looking at her, "I am speaking in paperwork, and I have a lot more reading to do." "You think I am done?" I asked, the question hanging in the air like smoke. "I am not done." I reached into the gray box binder and pulled out the rolled-up document I had photographed in his study. I had printed it on large format paper, preserving every detail. I unrolled it across the black tablecloth, weighing down the corners with the heavy stapler and the tape dispenser I had brought for this exact purpose. The family leaned in. It was the site plan for the Greystone Market Plaza. Caleb tried to snatch it away, but the developer, Jim, put a heavy hand on the table. Blocking him, Jim was looking at the paper with narrow eyes. "This is the development plan," Caleb said, his voice cracking. "So what? I told you I had a plan. I told you I was proactive." I pointed to the bottom right corner of the blueprint. "Look at the date, Caleb." The room went quiet as Aunt Linda squinted at the paper. "October, 2 years ago," she read aloud. I looked at the family. Grandmother died 4 months ago, but Caleb had these plans drawn up 18 months before her funeral. He was sitting at her dinner table, eating her pot roast, and smiling at her while he had a map in his pocket that turned her garden into a parking lot. I pointed to the red ink notes in the margins. "Look at the handwriting. Clear by Q2, maximize liquidity, and this one here, pointing to the barn. Demo cost high. Burn?" A collective gasp went through the tent. The idea of burning the barn my grandfather built with his own hands, was sacrilege. He was not reacting to an emergency. I said, my voice cold and steady. He was waiting for her to die. He was counting down the days. The reason he is rushing this sale is not because the estate is poor. It is because he has been spending this money in his head for 2 years. I did not give him time to recover. I flipped to tab 3 of the binder. I pulled out the loan rejection letter from the bank in Chicago. "He told you he was managing the estate's debts," I said to the crowd. "But here's a letter from a commercial lender rejecting Caleb's application for a personal bridge loan of $400,000. I held it up so everyone could see the bank logo. "Read the reason for rejection. Insufficient collateral title." I turned to Caleb. "You tried to use this farm as collateral for a personal loan 6 months ago. While she was in hospice, while she was dying in the back room, you were on the phone with bankers trying to mortgage the roof over her head." Caleb's face was a mask of sweat and panic. "That was for the business," he screamed, his composure shattering. "To cover the estate taxes. You do not understand finance. Maya." "I understand that you cannot collateralize an asset you do not own," I countered. "And I understand that when the bank said no, you went to a hard money lender. That is why we are here today, isn't it?" because that judgment lien hits on Monday." My cousin David stood up. He looked at Caleb with a mixture of horror and realization. "You told us the estate was bankrupt," David said. "You said we had to sell to pay off Grandma's medical bills." He lied. I said simply, "I flipped to tab 4. And just to make sure the appraisal came in low. Just to make sure the property looked like a liability, so you would all agree to sell it fast." He did this. I laid out the photos of the barn interior, the frost on the walls, the calves huddled together. Then I laid out the email. Subject, utility audit, kill the auxiliary power. If the animals are cold, they can huddle. Do not burn money. Aunt Linda let out a sob. She covered her mouth with her hand. She had named half those cows. "He cut the heat to the barn 3 nights ago." I said, "During the freeze, he risked killing the livestock to save $40 on an electric bill, just so he could tell you the farm was losing money." I slammed the receipt for the heaters and the hay onto the table. "I bought these heaters. I paid for the hay. I kept them alive while he was sitting in his warm house drafting a speech about family values." I looked at Caleb. He was shaking. He looked small. The suit that was supposed to make him look powerful now just looked like a costume. "You are not a steward of this family." "Caleb," I said, "you are a parasite." The tent was in chaos. People were shouting. Aunt Linda was crying. David was yelling at Caleb, asking where the rest of the money had gone. Tessa was trying to pull Caleb away, but he pushed her off, his eyes wild. "It is all lies," Caleb screamed, his voice shrill. "She is twisting it. She wants the money for herself. She is the greedy one." Then the developer spoke. Jim, the man in the navy suit, had been silent for the last 5 minutes. He had been watching the papers. He had been checking his phone. He had been listening to the accusations. He stepped forward. He did not look at Caleb. He looked at his watch. He picked up the contract he had brought, the sale agreement that was supposed to turn Greystone Acres into a strip mall. He ripped it in half. The sound of the tearing paper was louder than the shouting. It cut through the noise like a gunshot. "Deal is dead," Jim said. He dropped the torn pieces on the table. Caleb lunged for him. "Jim, wait, we can fix this. She is just—" Jim turned on him. "You represented that you had clear title. You represented that the family was in consensus. You represented that the property was solvent." Jim pointed at the pile of evidence on the table. "This is fraud. Mr. Whitaker, you wasted my time. You wasted my firm's resources. If you contact me again, I will have my legal department file a complaint with the state attorney general." He turned to me. He looked at the deed on the table, then at me. He nodded. A sharp, respectful gesture. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, "nice property. Sorry for the intrusion." He turned and walked out of the tent. The exit of the money changed everything, as long as the check was on the table. Some of the family members might have been willing to overlook the morality, but now, the $1.6 million was gone. It had walked out to a black SUV and driven away. The illusion crashed down. Caleb stood alone in the center of the ring. The slide projector was still humming behind him, showing the rendering of the plaza. A bright, happy lie, contrasting with the dark reality of the tent. "You ruined it!" Caleb shrieked, turning on me. He looked unhinged. His hair was coming loose from the gel, falling over his forehead. "You stupid, selfish girl! You burned it all down. We could have been rich." He looked at the cousins. "She took it from you," he yelled, pointing at me. "She cost you $50,000 each. Are you going to let her do that?" But nobody moved toward me. They were looking at Caleb. They were looking at the man who had lied about the debts, who had frozen the calves, who had tried to mortgage their grandmother's deathbed. I did not cost them anything. "Caleb," I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria, "because the money was never theirs, and it was never yours." I picked up the clipboard with the signatures, the consensus sheet he had bullied everyone into signing. I held it up. "You tried to get them to sign a waiver of liability," I said. You tried to trick them into signing away their right to sue you when they inevitably found out you had stolen the estate funds. I ripped the top page off the clipboard. But they know now. I looked at David. Check the estate accounts. David, I said, ask him for the bank statements. Ask him where the life insurance payout went. David looked at Caleb. His face was hard. Where's the insurance money? Caleb? David asked. Grandma had a $100,000 policy. Where is it? Caleb backed up, bumping into the projector screen. It is in the trust. It is tied up. Liar, Aunt Linda shouted. It was the first time I had ever heard her raise her voice at him. You bought a new truck 2 weeks after the funeral. I saw it. The dam broke. The family descended on him. Questions were fired like bullets. Where is the silver? Why did you sell the tractor? Why did you fire Hank? Caleb tried to shout over them, but he was drowning. He was contradicting himself with every breath. I did not sell the silver. It is in storage. Then why did I see it on an auction site? I interjected quietly. I did not fire Hank. He quit. Hank is sitting in his truck outside right now. I said, he told me you fired him for refusing to strip the copper wire. Every lie he told. I had a piece of paper to refute it. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to call him names. I just had to be the librarian of his sins. He looked around, wild-eyed. He realized he had lost the room. He realized he had lost the deal. And on Monday, he was going to lose everything else. He looked at me with pure venom. This is my house, he screamed. I am the executor. Get out. Get off my land. He grabbed a heavy glass pitcher of water from the table and hurled it at me. It missed me by inches, shattering against the metal pole of the tent. Water and glass sprayed everywhere. Aunt Linda screamed. I did not flinch. I did not move. I looked at the shards of glass on the ground. Then I looked at him. You are finished, Caleb. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I have already called the sheriff. I said, he is at the gate, and Graham Hollis is with him. Caleb's knees seemed to give out. He slumped against the podium, sliding down until he was sitting on the stage, a pathetic figure in a ruined suit. The family stepped back, leaving a circle of empty space around him. He was isolated. He was exposed. I closed the binder. The snap of the rings was the sound of a gavel coming down. I picked up my briefcase. I did not need to say anything else. The truth had done the work. The Greystone Market Plaza was dead. The farm was still here. And for the first time in 2 years, the air in the tent felt clean. The sound of shattering glass still seemed to vibrate in the air, but the violence of Caleb's action had achieved the opposite of what he intended. Instead of intimidating me, it had clarified the situation for everyone in the room. He was not a beleaguered executor trying to save the family. He was a desperate man throwing a tantrum because his lifeline had been cut. I did not wipe the water from my sleeve. I let it drip onto the floor, a physical marker of his loss of control. I stood tall, looking over the heads of my stunned relatives. This is a private residence, I announced, my voice projecting clearly without the need for a microphone. It is my property. I am revoking the invitation to this gathering. You have 60 minutes to remove your vehicles and your personal belongings from the premises. Caleb scrambled to his feet, his face purple. You cannot kick us out. This is family land. I turned to the entrance of the tent. The flap was pulled back, and Graham Hollis stepped inside. He was followed closely by a uniformed sheriff's deputy. Graham walked with the slow, inevitable gait of justice. He carried a leather folio tucked under his arm. He walked past the silent catering staff and the gaping cousins, coming to a stop next to my table. Mr. Whitaker, Graham said, his voice gravelly and authoritative. He held out a document. This is a formal cease and desist order, along with a notice of revocation of authority. Caleb stared at the paper as if it were toxic. Graham thrust it into his chest, forcing him to grab it reflexively. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the probate court has been notified of your conflict of interest and the existence of the inter vivos deed transfer. Graham continued, You are no longer authorized to act on behalf of the estate. Any contracts you attempt to sign, any checks you attempt to cash, and any assets you attempt to remove will be considered theft. The sheriff's deputy stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his belt. We are just here to keep the peace, folks, but if the owner wants you off the land, you have to go. The word owner landed like a hammer. It wasn't just Maya saying it anymore. It was the law. Caleb looked around, seeking an ally. Tessa? But Tessa was busy. She was currently being cornered by Aunt Linda and Cousin David. You knew, didn't you? David was asking, his voice rising. You told me the estate was bankrupt. You told me if I did not sign that waiver today, I would get nothing. Tessa tried to retreat into her role as the peacemaker. David, please, we were just trying to protect the family from... From what? Linda interrupted, her face flushed with anger. From the truth? You tried to make us sign away our rights so you could pay off a hard money loan. While they argued, another figure entered the tent. It was Hank Mercer. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing his work boots and his faded cap, looking like part of the land itself. Hank walked up to the riser. He stood next to me. He did not look at Caleb. He looked at the family. I was there, Hank said, his voice deep and rumbling. 2 years ago, I drove Eleanor to the notary. I watched her sign the deed to Maya. He paused, letting the words sink in. She told me she was doing it because she knew Caleb would try to sell the dirt out from under her memory, and she was right. Hank pointed a calloused finger at Caleb. I also watched him 3 days ago. I watched him order the crew to throw her quilts in a dumpster. I watched him laugh when they smashed her garden pots. He did not treat this place like a home. He treated it like a landfill he was trying to empty. Caleb looked like he was shrinking. His narrative was being dismantled from every angle, legal, financial, moral. But I had one last thing to reveal, one final piece of evidence to prove that his greed knew no bottom. I opened the binder to tab 5. Some of you might still think this was just about business, I said, drawing the room's attention back to me. You might think Caleb was just trying to be practical about real estate. I pulled out the printout of the auction listing. I held up the photo of the silver tea set with the EW engraving. This is Grandmother's silver tea set, I said. The one she used for every Christmas breakfast. The one she polished herself. I looked at Aunt Linda. You asked where the silver was. Caleb told you it was in storage. I held up the receipt. He sold it to a liquidation company 4 days ago. He sold it for scrap value. I watched the realization hit them. Selling land was one thing. That could be rationalized as moving on. But selling the family silver? That was a betrayal of the blood. I bought it back, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. I paid $800 to a stranger so that I could bring it home, because unlike Caleb, I know the difference between price and value. Aunt Linda turned to Caleb. She looked at him with an expression of pure disgust. You sold her teapot? She whispered. For a few $100s? Caleb opened his mouth to speak, to spin another lie, but nothing came out. There was no spin left. The centrifugal force of his own deception had torn him apart. The developer, Jim, had seen enough. He signaled to his team. They packed up their briefcases with efficient, silent movements. Jim did not shake Caleb's hand. He did not say goodbye. He simply walked out of the tent, stepping over the puddle of water and glass, and disappeared toward his car. The exit of the money was the final bell. Caleb stood alone on the riser. The projection screen behind him had gone into sleep mode. Turning black, the glossy rendering of the shopping mall was gone. He looked at the gray box binder on the table. For a second, a look of madness crossed his eyes. He lunged forward, his hands clawing for the papers, as if destroying the evidence would somehow rewind the last hour. Graham Hollis moved faster than a man of 70 should be able to. He slammed his hand down on the binder. Do not even think about it, Graham warned, his voice low and dangerous. Tampering with evidence. Destruction of legal documents. Do you want to add a felony to your list of problems today? The sheriff stepped closer, his thumb hooking into his belt loop. Step back, sir. Caleb froze. He looked at the binder. He looked at me. His chest was heaving. He looked stripped. The arrogance was gone. The suit was just fabric. The title of executor was just a word. "You," he hissed at me, his voice trembling with impotent rage. "You think you won? You have a farm that drains money. You have a herd of cows that need feeding. You have a roof that leaks. You did not win a prize. Maya, you won a burden." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had terrified me as a child with his loud voice and his bullying ways. I looked at the man who had tried to gaslight an entire family, and I realized he was not scary. He was just empty. I picked up the binder. I held it against my chest. "I did not win a burden. Caleb," I said, "I won a home." I took a step closer to him, invading his personal space for the first time. "And as for the money? You were so worried about the 1.6 million. You were so ready to sell her legacy to save your own skin." I gestured to the empty tent, to the family members who were now walking away, ignoring him, heading for their cars without looking back. "You did not sell the farm. Uncle Caleb," I said, delivering the final verdict, "you sold yourself, and you did it for cheap." I turned my back on him. "Sheriff," I said, "please ensure Mr. Whitaker escorts himself off the property within the hour. If he is still here at 3 o'clock, I want him arrested for trespassing." I walked out of the tent. I did not look back to see him crumble. I did not look back to see Tessa trying to chase after Aunt Linda. I walked across the lawn, the wind blowing against my face, feeling cleaner than I had in months. I walked up the steps of the farmhouse porch. The door still had the shiny new lock Caleb had installed to keep me out. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the keyring Graham had given me in the tent. The original keys, returned to their rightful owner. I unlocked the door. I stepped inside. The house was quiet. The frantic energy of the reunion, the noise of the lies, the chatter of the greedy. It was all outside, inside. The house smelled of old wood and dust, waiting for life to return. I walked to the dining room. It was empty, stripped of the table and the pictures, but the walls were still standing. The floor was still solid. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer and pulled out the small, spiral-bound notebook, Maya's First Garden. I walked over to the built-in china cabinet. The shelves were bare, stripped by Caleb's liquidation crew. I placed the notebook on the center shelf. It was a small thing, just paper and ink, but it was the seed. I stood there for a moment in the silence. I was alone. I had no $1.6 million. I had a leaking roof and a herd of cattle to feed and a family that was fractured. But as I looked at the notebook, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. Caleb had tried to tell me that family was about unity and consensus, even when it was built on lies. He had tried to tell me that value was a number on a check. He was wrong. Family is not the people who pressure you to sign a waiver. Family is not the blood that demands you stay silent while they strike a match. Family is the grandmother who plans 2 years ahead to protect you. Family is the lawyer who stands by your side when you have no money to pay him. Family is the handyman who sits in a freezing barn to keep a calf warm because it is the right thing to do. I walked back to the front door. I looked out at the driveway. The last of the cars were pulling away. Caleb's truck was gone. The sheriff's cruiser was idling by the gate, the final guardian. I closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. It was the sound of an ending and the sound of a beginning. I was Maya Whitaker. I was the owner of Greystone Acres, and I was finally home. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and reclamation. It was a long journey for Maya, but she stood her ground when it mattered most. I would love to hear from you. Where are you tuning in from right now? Are you listening from your car, your kitchen, or maybe your own garden? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading about where our community is growing from. If you enjoyed seeing Caleb get exactly what he deserved, please take a second to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button to support the content. And if you really want to help us out, smash that hype button so this story can be recommended to more people who need a little victory in their day. Until next time, stay strong and keep your receipts.